Okay, good day everyone. This is Mapletree Industrial Trust second quarter FY23-24 financial results dated 25th October 2023. Right, so key highlights: distribution to unit holders increased 3.5% year on year, but DPU has dropped 1.2%. Okay, primarily because they did fundraising, and this increased the shareholder base. Right, so this distribution actually just was spread over more shares. Right, so positive rental revisions across all property segments and higher average rental rates for Singapore portfolio and America portfolio. Right, they bought a new data center in Osaka on 20 September 2023. Borrowings are hedged at around 79%, which is good because they are more or less insulated from shorter term interest increases, as we'll see later, and healthy leverage of something like 38%. Right, so this is why MIT is such a well-regarded REIT. Alright, after it has been listed in 21st October 2021, you can see the DPU every financial year just increase every year. Right, so there's no break in the increase in DPU until FY22-23, which is very recent. Right, and if you look at the trend here, it looks like it's likely that it won't carry on improving. Alright, but we are hopeful that maybe they can stabilize in some it's zigzagging in a horizontal manner here lah. So hopefully it can stabilize here, and FY23-24's DPU will stay roughly at 13.57. Right, we look at the year-on-year results from this quarter and last financial year same quarter. Right, it is a drop of 1.2%. Right, if we look at the half yearly results from this financial year and last financial year, is a drop of 2%, and finally the latest quarter, which is Q1 to this quarter Q2, is a drop of 2.1%. so it's basically across the board more or less 2% drop lah. Right, so financial results, financial position, NAV has increased slightly from 1.85 to 1.88. Right, yeah, leverage, we talked about it before, around 38%. I think their yen borrowing, right, is actually probably good for them because if I remember correctly, Japanese yen has very low interest rates, so this might help their debt, their overall interest cost to actually drop, right, because they can borrow a bit more Japanese yen. Their debt this year is more or less settled. They have 3.2% left to settle. Across the board is around 20% yearly they have to refinance, right, so quite well spread out. Right, the interest coverage ratio is actually quite impressive at 4.6 times. You'll see later on when I do a comparison that this is the highest among maybe what I consider to be the top 5 REITs in Singapore lah. Right, so you can see that if there's a further increase in base rates of interest by 1%, right, plus 100 BPS is an increase of interest rate by 1%, the DPU only dropped by 1.5%. Right, so this is a result of their hedge borrowing costs, which is quite high, right, at I think 79%, yeah, 79.2%. Right, so actually they increased their percentage of debt at a fixed interest rate. Right, so this is the comparison. Right, I would say that across these 5 REITs, which I consider probably the strongest 5 REITs in Singapore, right, that the interest coverage ratio for MIT is the highest. Right, so that's good for them. And the only competitor is actually MPACT, which is the last REIT we looked at, but MPACT has a higher gearing ratio and also a lower credit rating lah. Although okay lah, actually it's hard to compare Moody with Fitch lah, but my guess is that if they went to the same credit rating, MIT would probably get a better credit rating lah. Right, but even if we ignore this, MIT is slightly better than MPACT because of lower gearing ratio, and the fact later on that you'll see that the NAV really should be probably higher than what is stated, which means that the actual gearing is probably lower as well lah. Okay, so anyway, this is the historical buildings that take up MIT. So you can see at the very initial state, MIT is a pure Singapore REIT. Right, then it expanded to America and into data centers. Right, so the data centers mostly in America, a little bit in Singapore, and at this point it was like more or less 50% in Singapore and 50% in America. When this is the latest annual report, I found out that they actually divested 2 properties above NAV. So you see that the Singapore property was sold for $13 million, right? It was valued at $11.9 million. The US data center was the one that's impressive. It was sold at $10 million when it was valued at $6.9 million. This is quite a big jump in terms of percentage, and they say this is non-core properties, which leads me to believe hypothetically that maybe the other properties which are considered core properties should actually fetch a larger premium than this premium over here and this premium over here. And that's very interesting to see, as we'll see later on. So you can see that from 2022 to 2023, actually what they did was they sold one property in Singapore and one property in the North America, right? So as mentioned earlier, right? So this is a very rough calculation based off what they have sold in terms of two properties. So I need you to first understand that this is a very small sample size of properties sold. So the fact that the SG premium is 9.24% and the US premium is 44.9% is, it could be quite skewed lah, right? So I took the NAV from 31st March 2023 because all this data here is taken off 31st March 2023 lah. So the NAV at that point was 1.85, and if I base that they are 50% in US and 50% in Singapore, which is roughly correct lah. I didn't use 50.3 lah because it's a little bit difficult to calculate that, but roughly using 50% in US, 50% in Singapore, with this premium added to the Singapore valuation and this premium added to the US valuation, I get a real NAV of $2.35, which is actually higher than its current trading price, which is something like 2.15, right? So I always thought MIT traded at a valuation that is higher than its NAV because of its increasing DPU, but I think now that maybe another reason is in play, right? I don't think the first reason is relevant, but it could also be that they tend to sell the properties at higher than what they have at valuation, right? Which means that the NAV here is actually probably higher, which is actually good for is gearing as well. Alright, that means gearing is probably lower. Right, please don't take this 2.35 too seriously. This is really a rough estimate. It's really rough. Right, so please don't buy or sell based on any number that I've written here. Okay, again I remind all of you that no financial advice is given on this channel. Right, so finally after that selling of those two properties, they added the Japanese data center. Maybe my suspicion is just to get the yen at a cheap rate, right? So they are trying to loan cheap money from the Japanese banks, right? So anyway, we look at occupancy rate is the lowest for business park and light industrial buildings. But you can see the high-tech parks don't have very high retention. This is the Japanese building they bought. The main outlook challenges are basically the same as other REIT lah. Rising property operating expenses and increase in borrowing costs, right? Singapore, they are not very optimistic because they say outlook remains lukewarm, but US, they seem to be optimistic. They say lack of power availability and extended lead times for critical equipment remain major constraints on new data center developments. This means that they expect their supply to get better rental rates. Okay, so with that, I'll end the presentation. Okay, thank you for listening.